a later date, you're more than welcome to. Right? And there's a bunch of people that have already sent me emails today saying they couldn't make it, so I will try and give this to them as well so that they have a way of getting class even though they missed. All right, so direct relationship, where one variable changes, the other one changes in the same way, and again, ceteris paribus, everything else staying quiet, okay? So let's try another one. Let's consider the relationship between the price of a good and how much of the good you buy. So this is just going to be another separate theory. It's going to be similar to this because we're looking at what's the relationship between these two. And again, remember, ceteris paribus is on, right? So I should really, at the end of this, add ceteris paribus, if I could spell it, ceteris paribus. So the only two things that we are going to consider changing is the price of it and how much of it you buy. Price and quantity. Very classic economic things to study. So let's put the price over here and put down here quantity that we buy along the bottom. And again, let's keep it relatively simple. $1, $2, $3, $4. And let's see, what should we work? Let's work with water bottles. If this bottle of water cost you $4, how many of them would you buy, say, in a month? We'll get there. Probably 0, but let's say that for simplicity's sake, let's say we'll maybe buy 1. Let's just go with just 1, because $4 is a lot to pay for water since you can get. Yeah, exactly. So suppose we'll buy 1. Now imagine that same bottle of water is now only $3. We'll maybe buy more, and let's suppose that it just goes up to 2. That's not such a bad idea, right? Because now it's getting cheaper. It's more affordable. At this stage, we're like, you pull into the gas station, and, oh, crap, they're selling, the worst kind of soda that you would ever drink, and so, but there's water there, so you're like, okay, I'll actually pay $3 for that water because you're dying in your car, right? I mean, that happens, right? So now, all of a sudden, they lower it to $2. Again, we want to keep it simple, so let's say that we would buy 3 of them because we like straight lines, and you guys now know that I like straight lines too. And when we connect the dots here, what happens to our line this time? It goes down, as opposed to going up. And again, does this sound like a good theory? Right? When the price of a good goes down, you are going to buy more, right? I mean, makes sense. Not always true, but if nothing else is changing, right, ceteris paribus is on, that makes sense. That's a good classic economic theory. This is known as an inverse relationship.
Or a sale.
I don't think we do, actually. We used to. All right, and again, notice what happened here. When the price went down, what happened to our quantity? It went up. One went down, the other went up. They went in opposite directions. That's why it's called inverse, right? Move in opposite directions. And it doesn't matter which way you go, right? If you think of it as when you raise the price, are you going to buy more or less? When the price goes up, you're going to buy less. If the price goes down, you're going to buy more. So either way you look at it, they're always going in opposite directions. Those are inverse relationships, right? And those will be important for when we start getting into how does supply and demand work? Ceteris paribus is still in effect. Nothing else is changing, just the price and the quantity that you buy. All right, so I don't want to know. Okay, so let's try one more. So this time, let's consider the relationship between the quantity of a drug that saves your life, i.e. you have some disease where if you don't take this drug once a month, you die. Okay? We want to look at how much of this drug you will buy versus compared to the price. In other words, how much would you pay? Not necessarily, but it is a very classic thing to include in an economic model. Price is a very standard thing to study in the economy, so we'll play with it a lot. All right. In general, folks, try to get in the habit of putting price along the y-axis, the vertical axis. That's where it tends to exist, okay? It will always be there throughout this class, so I'll try and put it there all the time just so that we're safe. All right? All right, now let's also assume that when you buy this drug, if you don't take it immediately, it's not effective. So in other words, it's one of those drugs where they mix it up in the factory right there or in the drugstore, and you got to take it right now, because if you don't, it's worthless. Right? So in other words, would you ever buy 2 of this thing? No, because you only need 1, and the second one, yeah, it's going to you're not going to need another one until next month. All right? So if the cost of this drug is $1, when you go to the drugstore, how many are you going to buy? You're going to buy 1. If the price of this drug goes up to, say, $10, how much are you going to buy? 1. Hmm? If the price, say, goes up to $1,000.
You may not buy one.
But hopefully you will have $1,000 and you will buy the drug, right? But assuming that insurance is a non-known factor. Now, we've got our 3 points. We can create our line. What kind of a line do we draw? Straight up and down, a nice vertical line. So does the price affect how much you're going to buy?
No.
Yeah, the price. If it's $1, doesn't matter. You're still going to buy 1. If it's $1 million, you're going to buy 1. This means the variables are independent. They're not related in any way, shape, or form. Right? So you would like to say that the price will always affect whether or not you're going to buy something, but if you're going to die if you don't buy it, price doesn't affect.
So this is really interesting here to me. I'm glad I took this class. But like going back to like when the cigarettes were, okay, when I was young, cigarettes was like 35, 50 cents, right?
Sure.
And then I remember when they first went up to $2, how everybody was like, if they go up to $2, I'm just going to quit smoking. Well, now cigarettes is like $10 and people are still buying them. So.
And we will get to that one, because you do probably people who are smoking are buying slightly less, or they're waiting for them to be on sale and buying them in bulk, whatever. And we'll get to stuff like that, but this is leading you to it at least. All right. All right. So the 3 types of relationships variables can have: direct relationships where they move together, inverse relationships where they move opposite of each other, and independent relationships where one of them can change but the other one just doesn't. That means they're not related really at all. All right? Now, you may say, okay, Marshall, this is all great. You've told us and forced us to have ceteris paribus. And that's good. It simplifies our models. But what happens if we let ceteris paribus go off? We let something else change. Looking at multiple factors. Now, if we only allow one thing to change, the nice part about it is that not a whole lot actually changes. So let's go back to our water bottle example. Let's suppose that Dasani water, when it was regular old water, this was what we would have bought given the prices. What happens if I told you that Dasani water will make you lose 15 pounds if you drink it on a regular basis? Just from drinking it. You don't have to do any exercise. You don't have to dance. You don't have to, go to a special workout. All you got to do is drink it. When it's $4 and it's known to help your body recover from everything and reduce weight and your eyesight will get better so you don't need glasses, this is a wonder drug. How much of these bottles are you going to buy for $4? More than one, right? We're going to go out here and say at $4, if this thing is going to help my health, maybe I'm going to buy, say, 3 of them in a month nowadays. I mean, it's still just water, and maybe they're pulling our leg, right? You're not 100% sure that the advertisement is correct, right? I mean, or maybe there's side effects, right? Just like all the drug ads you see on TV where they're curing indigestion, and one of the side effects may be indigestion.
Yeah.
Whatever. But the fact remains, though, is that you think it might be true. So you increase how much you're going to buy. And if they lower the price to $3, it still says it's going to help your health. You're going to live longer. It's going to save you, etc. Right? So when you start incorporating additional variables, what happens is that your line shifts. Your theory will shift. So you had this first theory that said, here's how price and quantity are related when we don't let anything else change. If we let one thing change, like whether or not it's a health product, it may shift our theory out a little bit. Notice it didn't change that it was a downward sloping line. All it did was changed where it was. Okay? Exactly. When we have, when you add one more factor, ceteris paribus is now off. You've changed one of the things that you were saying is going to be fixed. Now you've allowed a third variable to come in there. Theoretically, you're still keeping all the other variables fixed, though. So it's a mini release of ceteris paribus. You're only letting one other thing change. That's as far as we will ever go in this class, is allowing two things to have a relationship and then potentially change one other thing. That's it, okay? And this shifted it to the right because we said that the water was really good for you. What happens if we came along and we said that this water is dangerous for you? It's actually full of PCPs and it's going to give you cancer. What's going to happen to the line? Is it going to move to the right? It's going to shift to the left, right? At $4, you're going to be like, no way am I buying anything. At $3, are you going to buy any? Probably not still. At $2, are you going to buy anything? Probably not. At $1, well, if you're really bad off, maybe you might buy one, right? And so, maybe your line does shift a little bit and it gets a little curved, but again, the idea, though, is that if it's going to increase your quantity, it will shift to the right. If it's going to decrease your quantity, it shifts it to the left. All right? And that's a very standard economic theory practice to work with, is that increases shift lines to the right. Decreases shift lines to the left. All right? And we will see this in a more concrete example once we get to Chapter 3. All right?
Economics is ceteris paribus thrown off it?
Yeah, but you tend to start with it at the very beginning. So when you first create your theory, you're going to essentially say ceteris paribus is on, because you're going to say, here's the relationship between two variables. And then what we'll do after that is say, allow something else to change. Release ceteris paribus. How does it make things shift? And like I said, hopefully when we get to Chapter 3, you will see this in brighter detail. All right, so again, this is me just trying to get you feeling slightly comfortable with lines. All right? All right. So that's the appendix. That's, again, I'm not testing, no homework on the appendix, but I wanted you to get an introduction to it, because when we get to chapter 3, we're going to come back to this stuff, and hopefully it will start to make clearer sense with real economic examples. All right, so now let's move into chapter 2. In chapter 2, you understand what economics is. You understand the fundamentals behind it, right? Allocating resources to make goods and services. So the question now is, you've got some resources. What are you going to produce? How are you going to start making money in this economy? What do we have to do to get the economy going, right? Or there are 3 fundamental economic questions that you must answer before you start diving into an economy or diving into a business to some degree. So if you guys are going to start your own business, what's the first thing you got to decide about your business? What are you going to do? Exactly. What are you going to do? First question is what to make. What do we got to do next? Yeah, how? So if you decide you're going to make snowmen coffee mugs, how are you going to make them? Are you going to buy a factory and hire workers and do it in a big, huge factory that cranks them out a ton at a time? Or are you going to make them by hand? You're going to fire them yourselves, glaze them yourselves, do all the painting yourselves so that each one is a work of art. You got to decide, right? And then the last thing you have to decide is once you have them, who are you going to sell them to? For whom do you produce? So in other words, if you're going to by hand produce all of these wonderful mugs, are you only going to sell them in the Janesville, Rock County area? Because at that stage then, there's not a whole lot of logistics involved in your business. If you're a good artist and you can make beautiful snowmen coffee mugs, and you can make enough to make a living by only selling them in the southern central Wisconsin area, maybe that's good enough. If, on the other hand, you want to sell it statewide, right? Now you have to ship your goods. You won't be able to just drive them to the stores yourself. You're going to have somebody that's going to package your mugs. They're going to have to ship them to the stores that are going to sell them. You're going to have a relationship with the stores that are going to sell them. Business is involved. And heaven forbid you actually go global, where you actually have to start dealing with not just logistics and transport, but legal restrictions. Whether or not you used, any lead particles in your cup, because Europe won't allow you to sell them in there if there are, right? Are you going to be able to get them shipped over by air or by sea to go to Japan and sell them? I mean, it would be nice to be able to sell them everywhere, right? Because then you have a wider market of selling, but there are costs to that, right? You're going to have to fill out import duty laws. You're going to have to fill out export papers for the U.S. government, right? Because if you happen to ship some of these to Pakistan or Afghanistan, the government's going to want to know what you're doing. So you have to make these decisions. It's definitely a factor in starting up a business. So these are our 3 fundamental questions we have to answer before we start any sort of economic endeavor. Now, as we are making these choices, right? What we are deciding or what we are using to determine our choices are our opportunity costs. Opportunity cost is a very classic economic concept. First thing I like to point out is that this word, cost, is misleading. An opportunity cost is not a price, okay? I would almost like it if they would have called this the opportunity sacrifice, because that's what it really means. The opportunity cost for any choice you make is what you had to give up to make that choice. So when you decided today that at 1 o'clock you were going to come to class, you could have been doing something else. So you could have been working, right? If you had a job that was available and you could go there, you could work. You could have spent time with your family. You could have just slept, right? Any one of those things that you would have done if you had chosen not to go to class, that's the opportunity cost of coming to class, right? So opportunity cost is what you gave up to make a choice. And it's assigned to every choice you make. So you may think that economics has nothing to do with you, but every time you make a decision, you are, period. Because you're giving something up every time you choose to do something else. That's all there is to it, right? And you may say, no, I'm forced to wake up every day at 6 a.m. And I'm like, no, you're not. You are making a choice to wake up at 6 a.m. every day. You can choose not to if you don't want to. So economics, always, every time. Essentially, yeah, that there is always an opportunity cost to everything that you get. Even if it looks like it's free, you had to give up something. Right? So if you win the lottery, I'm going to give you a free car. What's the opportunity cost of that car? Well, you had to give up time to go get it. You're going to have to pay taxes to get it. Right? But again, think of it more along the lines, though, of it's anytime you make a choice, you have to give something up.
Even if it's beneficial?
Yeah, because there might be something else that's equally as beneficial. Now, the idea is that you are a logical human being, and that when you make a choice, every time you make a choice, you choose the one that's most beneficial. I mean, at least at that current time. Right? It may not be the most beneficial one later, but at that time, you are logical and choose to do the best thing that you could possibly do. But there was always something that you passed up. That's the opportunity cost of making that choice, right?
So what you give up doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing.
No, not necessarily. No, I mean, that's why time with family, right? I mean, you had to give it up to come to this class, right? Time with family is, well, usually it's a good thing. All right, so the classic definition of opportunity cost, if you read it in the book, is the cost of the next best option in every choice. That's the way the book is going to describe it, and that's the more classical way of describing it, but I like to use a little bit more real definition in my opinion, which is what you had to give up. Because opportunity cost, everybody tends to think it's a dollar amount. I had to give up $10 to come to this class, or I had to pay, $400 per credit in order to take this class. That is not the opportunity cost, right? The opportunity cost is what you gave up to come to class, not what you paid to come to class. That's the actual cost, not the opportunity cost.
And some of your costs can be beneficial to you, like going to bed early enough to get enough rest because you have to go to class the next day. So going to bed early.
You may have given up.
You wanted to stay up.
Yeah, going out with your friends, partying.
I wanted to watch some TV, but I knew I had to be here.
Mhm.
So I went to bed. I could bed.
So the opportunity cost of you going to bed was not getting to watch TV. That's the way it is. All right. All right, so that's opportunity cost. Now, I'm going to skip that. All right, so what I want to do is now go into some more classic economic theory. Consider a company that can make two things. Two goods. And let's suppose that the two goods that they can make are guns and butter. I agree, two totally different things, right? But that's a very classic economic argument. Adam Smith, who is sort of the father of economics, this was the first example he used to explain opportunity cost to his students, was guns and butter. So this is early 1800s. And there was, For whatever reason, he used it, all right? So it's a sort of an inside joke for an economist anytime you use an example that has guns and butter in it. So you're going to see me up here smiling because it's an inside funny joke for an economist. You guys will look at it and go, freak, and that's okay. But realize that's what we're trying to do. So what I want to do is to draw a graph of how I'm going to create this company. All right, so I have a company that can create two things, right? I've got enough land, I've got enough labor, and enough capital, enough resources to produce a certain amount of guns or a certain amount of butter. All right? So let's assume that my company can produce 1,000 guns if I take all of my resources. So all of my land, all of my labor, all of my people, and all us produce guns, I can produce 1,000 guns in a month. If I switch all of my resources to just producing butter, let's assume that I could produce 800 pounds of butter in that same amount of month with the same amount of resources. So our resources are fixed. The amount of land we have, the amount of people we have, and the amount of capital we have is fixed. It's not changing, and you can either choose to produce guns or you can choose to produce butter. Now, my question to you is, what's the line look like between guns and butter if we take our company and produce some guns and some butter instead of all of one or all of the other? You would think it would be a straight line. And since I'm asking, you probably are right in assuming that it is not a straight line, and you are correct. It is actually not a straight line, and the question is, why? And here I will draw for you the way the curve looks. It's a bowed out curve. Why do we think it's not straight? All right? So let's start with a simple example. Suppose I took half of my land, half of my labor, and half of my capital and changed it from producing guns to producing butter. So if I took half of my guns away, how many guns would I have? 500. So the question is, if we took half here and put it over here, what would you expect the amount of butter to be? You would expect it to be 400, right? Well, my supposition is that that's not true. Well, let's assume that the costs are roughly the same. And the costs are based on how much I can produce. Okay? Yes, we're going to get more than 400 butter. The question, though, is, well, we can't ever get more than 800. 800 is the most we could ever get. If we took everything and had it make butter, it would only make 800. So the question is, why is it that when you take people away from producing guns, that they may produce more butter? And easier, you're on the right track.
More effective.
Or it may be that you like producing butter instead of producing guns. I mean, how many of you here actually like guns? I mean, really like them. All right? If you really like guns, which would you rather be doing, producing guns or butter? It's a toss-up for you. But so in general, though, if you think about it, people who are really good with mechanical objects and are really good with, say, maybe dealing with small, intricate pieces would be really good at producing guns, right? But some of those people out there that are in your labor force are probably farmers. Is a farmer going to want to be sitting around working on a really small, meticulous piece of material with their farmer hands? Right? Have you ever? You guys have seen farmer hands, right? My father-in-law has these, sausages, for fingers. Right? Those guys, they're going to want to be making butter instead of making guns, right? Because they want to go out and deal with the cows and the chickens and the putting the fence up and whatnot, right? So when you take people away from producing guns and have them produce butter, the first people you're going to grab are all those farmers, right? You're going to say, look, I know I'm making you produce guns right now, and I'm sorry, but now I'm going to switch some. So would you like to go produce butter? And all those people who are farmers are like, yay, yay, I want to go, right? And so they do. They go over and they start producing butter. And are they going to be more efficient and better at producing butter than they were at producing guns? Heck yeah, right? So when you take the first, say we take the first 200 people or 200 guns worth of people, right? So we take out enough people, and they're all the people that don't like guns and don't like, mechanical objects, right? We take them away from producing guns. So we're producing less guns because they can produce some guns, just not many. But what they do is they're really good at making butter. And so they're really effective at it, right? So there's not a whole lot of people getting in the way, and there's not people out there who hate the outdoors and hate animals and all other stuff. So they're really good at it, and you produce a whole ton of butter. You actually make 500 pounds of butter and 800 guns if you split it up that way.
But why wouldn't you make more than 800?
Well, we'll never make more than 800, because if you take all of those people and push them into producing butter, some of those people are going to be people who like working with guns and hate animals. So when you force everybody who likes guns and mechanical objects to work in a farm, yeah, are they going to be really good at producing butter? No. I mean, you can make them do it, but they're going to sit around and be like, yeah, churn butter, great. They're not going to make as much. That's the concept behind it. So that as you make more people produce butter instead of guns, eventually you're going to start taking people who like guns away and send them to the butter side, and they're not going to be as effective, right? This is what's known as the law of increasing opportunity cost. Yeah, the more you want to make of one particular object, the more you have to sacrifice of the other, right? So if you gave up 200 more guns, you may gain 100 more pounds of butter. Notice, the first 200 guns, how much did we get? 500. The next 200, how much did we get? Only 100. We only gained 100. There's the increasing opportunity cost, right? If we gave away another 200 guns, maybe we would only get up to 675 pounds of butter, right? Again, we're taking people who like guns and now forcing them to take care of cows. And, they're probably carrying a gun in their back pocket, and every now and then they shoot the cow just to have fun, right? I mean, that's not going to be very effective. But the idea here is that this bowed-out curve is what forces the opportunity costs to always be increasing. And it's very true. It's the same for you guys, right? If you think about it. If you've got more than one subject to study for, if you spend all of your time studying on one topic, the last 5 or 6 hours you spend on something after you've spent 20 hours on it, how worthwhile is it? It's not worth that much, right? Because you're trying to get more and more and more out of something when if you're giving up studying for math to make sure you get an A in economics, right? And those last 4 or 5 hours, they may help you a little bit, enough to get you from an A- to a solid A. But if you would have studied a little bit on your math during that time, you could have gotten an A- in economics and gotten, say, a C in math instead of an F. That's the concept behind it. You're going to have to give up stuff, and the more you want to produce in one thing, the more you're going to have to give up, right? So it's a very, in my opinion, it's a very natural way of seeing it. So I hope that this makes more sense than just seeing the picture and hearing the words. All right? All right, now, let's take, this is just one company. And again, it's kind of a fictitious company because how many companies make just guns and butter? Yeah, not many. So what happens if we want to do this for the entire USA economy? We want to have a graph that represents what we're producing. And just so that you know, this is what's called a production possibilities curve. the idea here is that this point on the line represents the most you could produce in guns. This represents the most you could produce in butter. And any other point on the line represents how much you would have in one versus the other if you started mixing and matching, right? So this here, where you have 800 guns and 500 pounds of butter, is another possibility if you use all of your resources, right? Again, remember, we're in this assumption, we're assuming that everybody works a full 8 hours, none of your land is left fallow, you're using all of it, right? You're using all of your resources. All right, so when we look at the entire USA, does the U.S. just make guns and butter? No. Okay, so we can move away from guns and butter. The way we will organize these is into capital goods and consumer goods. First question for you, what's the difference between the two? Well, you could buy both capital goods or consumer goods. Not necessarily true either.
I think you just blew my theory. Capital goods are things that people buy to make things.
Uh-huh.
Consumer goods are like
Yeah, goods and services like Dasani water, stuff that you consume, and when you consume it, it's gone. Whereas if you build a classroom, when we're done using this classroom, is that classroom gone? No, somebody can come in and use it after us, right? If you buy a truck, once you use the truck once, is it done? No, you can continue to use it, right? That's the difference between capital goods and consumer goods. So when you think of capital goods here, think of resources called capital. Goods that you create to help you produce more goods.
Buildings, machines, trucks.
Roads, infrastructure, all of that kind of stuff. That's capital goods. All right? Consumer goods are the stuff that make your life fun. Right? Food, sugars, and sodas, and movies, and all that other kind of stuff. All right? So, it's a production possibilities curve, so it is still a bowed out curve. Anytime I ask you to draw a production possibilities curve, you should always draw it as a bowed out curve. Hint, hint, that's the sort of thing you will do in the future on a quiz and or test. Production possibilities curve. It's often abbreviated as the PPC. All right, so my question to you is, given the state of our current economy, the U.S. economy right now, which do you think we are producing more of? Capital goods or consumer goods? Why? Yeah, we have a very high we have a very high standard of living in this country. Therefore, we are generally going to be more concerned with consumer goods than capital goods. Because
Talking the entire USA and consumers buy from all over the world.
very true, but we're really just looking at what does the U.S. produce. Yeah, and in general, we produce more things that are consumer-driven than are capital-driven. I mean, it's just, not that we don't produce some capital, but not as much. So, if we are using all of our resources, it's my supposition that our point on the production possibilities curve is, say, somewhere over here. Because here, there are this many consumer goods and this many capital goods. So much more consumer goods than capital goods. All right? Now, yeah?
Consumer goods are going down.
No, consumer goods are going along the right and left. Consumer goods are
going down.
going up and down are capital. This is just me drawing a straight line down to where the consumer goods are. That's all.
Okay.
All right, so this point is a point on the line if we are using all of our resources. What are resources again?
Land, air,
Capital.
Land, labor, and capital. Are we using all of our land? Is all of our land being used right now? Is it all being used? Do you think there's any land that's just sitting there doing nothing?
Well, it's producing air.
It might be, yeah.
There's air that we
It might be producing, but not as much as it potentially could. Is everyone working?
No.
Oh, okay. Are there any buildings that we're not using?
Yes.
So there isn't like a big, huge car factory sitting, within 20 miles of here that's empty. Right? So are we on this line where we're using all of our resources? No. So where are we on this graph? Are we somewhere up here? We are inside, yeah, because we have to be producing less consumer and capital goods because some of us aren't working. Some of our factories are not running. Some of our land is lying fallow and not being used at all, other than to potentially clean up the air a little bit. So the idea here is that probably our real point is somewhere inside of here. Real point of production due to inefficiency. And inefficiency basically means that you're not using all of your resources. Right, so here's another definition. Any point inside a production possibilities curve is a point that you could be producing at as a nation, but you would be doing it inefficiently because some part of your resources would be inactive or not being used, i.e., anytime you have any unemployment. So, hear me. Not possible, exactly. Or unattainable. In other words, we don't have enough resources to produce there. But the question is, how could we get there? How could we reach this point? What would we need to do? We would need to get more resources. How would we do that? Well, what are our three resources? Land. How could we get more land? War. Very good point, right? We could go to war in Kuwait and set up a factory there. We could go to war in Iraq. We could set up some bases there. We could take over Canada and have it be the 51st state. Or we could build additional goods, right? We could build more buildings or update our factories or update our roads and our infrastructure such that the idea here is that these capital goods on this graph represent the growth capacity of our country. The more capital goods we're producing, the more ability for us to grow as a nation in the future, right? So why don't we as a nation produce more capital goods? Well, no, we have the money. We are the richest country in the world, folks. Why don't we produce more capital goods? Well, that's true. But why don't we spend more money on roads and infrastructure than we do on soda and movie stars and sports stars and the other sort of consumer goods that we...
Because we got a screwed up country.
Because the people that's spending our money is not spending our
No, I'm talking about you yourself, right? I mean... I know, but you could build new, you could give your Tate in order to help it build additional roads, right?
Really?
You could if you want.
We don't got the money.
Exactly, because we're a consumer nation, because we are selfish, and because we like our standard of living. All of these consumer goods are what make life worth living, folks. I mean, we want to be able to go to see the Packers play an NFL football game and have the stadium be packed, and we want to see them crunching each other and not, take this huge hit and then bounce back up and kind of wobble a little bit and then keep playing again, right? I mean, we want that because it's $70, $80 a ticket to go to that game. Pay a football player $5 million a year to play football. Guess how much they pay me? Do you think it's $5 million? What am I doing by teaching you, though? I'm giving you more resources. Education is a resource. The more education you have, the better able you are to produce goods. the more productive I'm making our production possibilities curve grow. That football player, he ain't doing jack for making us as a country grow. Why don't I get paid more?
But you're not an entertainer.
Damn it! This isn't entertaining? Yes. Again, it's not a good or a bad thing. It's just a thing, right? The more affluent your country is, the more, the higher your standard of living, the more consumer goods you need. But the opportunity cost of producing those consumer goods is giving up capital goods. That's what's happening to us, folks. We've been producing consumer goods for so long that our capital is decaying and that our capacity to grow is shrinking. This is why our country isn't growing as much. Right? If you think about the history, think about the U.S. in the 1950s.
Hold on. So
Okay.
if we buy less consumer goods, our capital goods would go up.
Yes, because if you don't buy consumer goods, where's the money have to go in this very simplified model? Right? If you're not buying a consumer good, where does the money go? Technically it has to go into capital because I've simplified it very, very, very much. Bear that with me, okay? The idea here is that if you give up consumer goods, the only thing you're going to gain are capital goods. So if you quit buying Pepsi and tickets to the Green Bay Packers, what you will do is buy a new Ford F-150 and you will start your own construction business and this country will start booming, right? In theory.
In theory, small business propels growth.
Exactly, right? Mm-hmm. And that's what we would be better spending our money on if we wanted this country to grow in the future.
That would be opportunity cost.
Exactly, the opportunity cost. You have to give up some of your consumer goods in order to get these capital goods that will lead to growth in the future. So this is the double-edged sword, right? That's exactly what opportunity costs are all about. Right? We as a country want to have a nice high standard of living. We want to be able to have cheap cell phones and cheap TVs and great football teams and whatnot, but all of those things are consumer goods. They're not helping us grow in the future in any way, shape, or form. So why aren't we, say, paying more taxes so that our governments will build more roads? Because that will allow us to grow in the future. And if you look at our country back in the 1950s, tax rates in this country were 7, 8 percentage points higher back in the 50s. What was our country doing in the 50s? Growing. We were building our infrastructure. We were building the best road system in the entire world. Right? That's what we were doing back in the 50s because instead of doing more consumer goods, we were probably way up here. Spending more of our money on capital goods, we still had some consumer goods. Our standard of living was good. It just wasn't as nice as it is now. I mean, so is it bad that we're producing more of these consumer goods?
Well, is that really the answer? I mean, we play this game a lot. Let's go with the global economy.
Mm-hmm.
Compete with the rest of the world.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, we sold a lot of industries overseas, so we lost jobs. So some of our capital goods diminished because of stuff like that, because of business. That had nothing to do with consumers.
Did because we wanted those consumer goods cheaper, so that we could buy more of them.
We have to get our way.
Well, yeah, and we wanted them cheaper so we could buy more of them. So that's why we sent our infrastructure or our companies to other countries.
Oh, that word "we" wasn't part of that.
Unfortunately, as a citizen of the country, you did.
I drew stick.
Well, we all did a little bit, right? So, but the idea here is that's the idea behind it, right? Is that if we wanted this country to try and grow, we would focus on consumer goods, but that means you guys would have to give up some of the things that make our life better, right? You'd have, yeah, some of the fluff. It would have to go away, right?
Well, that would be very hard. The generation I mean today.
Amen, sister, but...
I mean, the generation today, because in my generation, we didn't have all these.
Oh, that's what every older generation says.
We did fine, and I mean, I still do fine without a computer and whatnot at my house. I mean, I have one, but I do fine without it. I have to do more work. I have to actually read, search, and all
I
that.
want to go back to the push ball.
See? Okay, so one last thing about these production possibilities curves, right? When you, as a country, focus more on capital goods, on growth in the future, how would we represent the growth in this picture? If we had more capital resources, what would happen to our graph when we had more resources?
The consumer goods would diminish.
Well, no, I mean, this is...
Would it become like a straight or something if the consumer?
Like it would go bigger.
Bigger, exactly. It shifts out. If we have more resources, our capacity to produce grows. So this movement of the production possibility curve out represents economic growth. When our economies are growing, we have the ability to produce more, right? And it's our choice which one we want to produce more of, capital goods or consumer goods. We still have that choice. And it, kind of depends on our buying patterns as to which way we will grow, whether we will grow towards more consumer goods or more capital goods. Likewise, if we go into a recession, what happens to the production possibilities curve? Right? This, as our capacity to produce decreases, right? So when you are in a recession, you're not keeping up your capital goods, right? Remember, capital goods are always depreciating, right? The more you drive your Ford 1F50, the more it's going to break down eventually, right? So if you're not putting money into it, eventually it gets broken. This is economic shrinkage. So these production possibilities curves, they're very nice at pointing out what opportunity costs are. That every time you choose to do something, you have to give something else up. Right? That's part of the game. It's not a good or a bad thing. Right? Deal with it. That is the end of chapter 2. Homework for chapter 2. 6, 8, and 10. Someone confirm what page that's on for me, if you don't mind. Page 40? Yes, that's good. That's the same I have. All right, so on page 40, questions numbered 6, 8, and 10. These questions, there are a couple of them in here that are challenging.
I need 6, 8, and 10.
6, 8, and 10.
I need to know what I wrote it on something, can't find it from yesterday.
From last time?
Yeah.
2, 4, and 10. 2, 4, and 10 from chapter 1, 6, 8, and 10 from chapter 2. Yeah.
Those that got it.
Those that have the chapter 1 homework done, I would appreciate if you turned it in before you left. Again, realize that you have until Wednesday of next week to finish it. If you didn't, it's okay if you turn it in then. This one will be due Wednesday, and since you've got a week to do it, it's due Wednesday. Yeah, no extra credit for this one, sorry. If you have the extra credit with you, that would be great too. If you just have it with your homework, that's fine as well. Yeah, would you? Hit the same dot.